And one thing I would say, since we are, believers here on this podcast specifically,
Hmm.
and we have a
Hmm.
kingdom that is bigger than this world and bigger than our allegiance to our own country and our own borders, is that the Bible has nothing to say about U.S. immigration. Period. The Bible has nothing to say about it. What should U.S. immigration look like? That you won't find it. However, what you will find over 100 times is a call to us as believers on how to treat the sojourner, the foreigner, the alien, depending on how you translate the term, the immigrant.
Happy New Year's Eve and welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Grosso. This Christmas season, I'm sharing 3 interviews all about loving refugees. This year, we've seen many headlines about global conflicts, and at the same time, the United States has nearly entirely cut its refugee resettlement program. I think this is an appropriate Christmas topic as we celebrate the story of Jesus' birth, which of course immediately preceded his family fleeing violence and living as refugees. In the first episode of this series, we learned about life in refugee camps. In the second one, we did a deep dive into America's refugee resettlement program. And in this final one, I talked with Jenny Murray, the CEO of the National Immigration Forum, or just the Forum, about the politics of immigration under Trump's second administration. Jenny is incredibly sharp on this topic, and I learned a lot about refugee care in this episode and immigration policy more broadly. Jenny has a wealth of experience and expertise on immigration, and she also holds a Master's of Divinity. So we talk about how our faith informs our perspectives on immigration policy. We talk about differences between refugees, asylees, and other kinds of immigrants, the compartmentalization of faith and politics, and the Forum's common sense approach to immigration reform. So join me for a conversation about Jesus, immigrants, and politics, and a year of significant disruption to America's immigration system. This is your podcast, so as always, send me your thoughts, questions, and suggestions at brian@simplecharity.org. And if the show is helpful, please click a 5-star rating in your podcast app. This helps the algorithm get the show out to more listeners. Also hit subscribe, whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I serve as a Simple Charity philanthropic advisor to individuals, couples, families, foundations, and family offices in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but also to clients around the country. If you're curious about your own generosity journey and would like help thinking through a philanthropic strategy with intentionality to discern where God is calling you to love people, to find excellent nonprofits to partner with, or to understand the impact of your current grant making, I would love to connect and share more about Simple Charity's philanthropic advising offerings. You can connect with me at melissahall@simplecharity.org. That's Melissa Hall at simplecharity.org. And you can learn more about us at simplecharity.org. That's simplecharity.org.
Jenny Murray, welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. Really glad to be here.
Jenny, what are you grateful for today?
When you ask me that, the first thing that jumps to mind is that this year has been a pretty significant health concern year for my dad, and we have just gotten a cancer-free diagnosis, which is amazing.
Wow.
That news that the treatment is working, and so I'm that's my immediate quick response. It's been a very hard year in that direction, but I'm really thankful for my family's health and especially my dad's this holidays.
Praise God. What a great note
Truly.
going into Christmas and New Year's.
Truly.
We get to spend some time with your dad and extended family.
Yes, we're headed there tomorrow. We're
Awesome.
going to see them tomorrow so we can hug and celebrate in person.
That's awesome. Well, I'm
Yeah.
calling from Georgia, and you mentioned that you're in Pacific time. Where exactly in the world are you?
So I actually live in the Bay, but fun fact, so in the San Francisco Bay Area, my husband's in tech, but fun fact, I'm from Nashville. So I know
Oh,
Georgia
cool.
pretty well. I went to school in West Tennessee and in Nashville, so I know the Southeast very well, and I miss my Christmases there, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish we had a white Christmas. And my kids, I have 3 kids, and they've been asking, are we going to have a white Christmas? Are we going to have a white Christmas? And I don't know how to break it to them that growing up in Georgia, which they'll probably spend a lot of their childhood in Georgia, they will almost certainly never have a white Christmas.
No,
I grew up here,
they'll
and
have an
I
icy.
don't
They
think I
might
ever
have an
did.
icy, right? They'll have an icy
Maybe, yeah.
Christmas where they can't drive
A black
anywhere.
ice Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was those were my growing up years as well. But hey, don't tell them yet, but they'll get a lot of missed school out of that black ice.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's something to look forward to. Well, Jenny, we are doing a little Christmas series, a mini series, if you will, on the Simple Charity podcast about loving refugees. And so far, we've had two conversations. I don't think I have told you about them, so I wanted to catch you up a little on what we've talked about so far. But we interviewed Scott Key, who started a nonprofit called Every Shelter, and they build shelters in refugee camps. And we talked about how, on average, people in refugee camps live there for decades, not years.
That's right.
So
That's right.
That was really revelatory for me, thinking, gosh, there are kids whose entire childhoods will be spent in refugee camps. And then once they are deeply vetted, and that was our second conversation with someone who worked for Inspiritus here in Atlanta, has been in refugee resettlement for a long, long time. We talked about, the process of how refugees get vetted and how they eventually come overseas and are resettled. And we talked some about the current administration this year and how that program has been changed. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And what I want to talk about is, I guess, evangelicals and how we can have a theology of immigration, a biblical theology of immigration. You kind of sit in this interesting space within, I guess, evangelicals and politics, talk about religion and politics and immigration.
Yeah.
All sorts of
all the
fun
topics we're not supposed to talk about, right? I talk about all of them.
Let's talk about them. That's great. That's great. And so I'm excited for our conversation today. But for those who don't know, tell me who you are, what you do, and then a little bit about the story of Women of Welcome.
Sure. Yeah. So the Forum, National Immigration Forum, we go by Forum, is a 43-year-old immigration advocacy, nonpartisan, and bipartisan, because we do put compromises together, but nonpartisan organization that works to ensure that we have common sense solutions for all Americans, those that are native born and foreign born who have been welcomed in our country, ones that help us all to thrive together. So I'm the CEO of that organization. I'm going on my 13th year at the organization, not in this role, but in the leadership. And my background is refugee resettlement, and we can get into it a bit more, but more recently, I was able to be both a part of Operation Allies Welcome on the 8 military bases, welcoming the Afghan newcomers after the fall of Kabul and helping the resettlement process on the military bases. And then also was able to go to Warsaw to help for the first 6 months of the war for the Ukrainian 3.5 million women and children who were displaced in Poland kind of overnight, and the fact that Poland had to ramp up to sort of meet that need. So I bring all of that to the organization. I bring all of that to my work, and the reason why I'm in the work is both my family and my faith leads me to your good point, to realize that there's a lot of moderate to conservative folks who do feel strongly that immigration matters, that how we treat immigrants and newcomers matters, and that we need to have policies that help us live into that, especially as Christians.
Yeah. I had mentioned Women of Welcome just because I know that's a new initiative. I connected with someone from your team about that. And I think that's been a remarkable story, kind of, a more recent story this year. But before, I guess, we talk about that, tell me more about the National Immigration Forum. What particular activities do you do, and what do you see as the impact of your work there?
Yeah, so the Forum is such a unique place. I feel so lucky to be there. In fact, I actually did take that little hiatus to go help with those two movements that we just talked about and came back. And I came back with an invitation because I really felt that the way that the forum is trying to do immigration reform is exactly what our country needs. And so the
Yeah.
forum works to pull together moderate to conservative folks who are in favor of reforms for immigration, but their voice just doesn't usually have amplification in the same way. And often people get miscategorized, right? Just if you happen to vote conservatively, it means that you don't want immigrants in the country, or you aren't thinking about what those balanced policies might be. And we know that not to be true. We know so many folks in the space. So the forum pulls together. It's a fun name: Bibles, Badges, and Business. So we bring together evangelical leaders. Over 11,000 evangelical leaders in that space, including Women of Welcome, which we can absolutely talk about, which is a different part of that group. It doesn't actually count as that 11,000. It's hundreds of thousands of women. But then law enforcement, so 160 police chiefs and sheriffs across the country, mostly in red and purple places, who believe that we are safer when local policing isn't focused on immigration enforcement, but rather focused on making sure all people report crimes, all people participate in investigations, work with law enforcement, and they can't do that if they're afraid of law enforcement. And so the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force is an amazing group of folks. And then we work with the Council on National Security and Immigration. A lot of these folks were the folks who led ICE, DHS, CBP, and a number of initiatives in the first Trump administration and also in the Bush administration. So conservative national security leaders who very much believe that we have a really strong vetting process. We are safer when we do have an immigration process that helps our foreign relations, right? And then the last category is business. We have a corporate roundtable with 50 of the nation's largest corporations who are concerned about American business. They're concerned about the workforce. They want to make sure we have enough workers to continue to have a strong GDP. So we get to pull all those folks together, which is quite fun. And oftentimes, from all those varying perspectives, they weigh in on immigration, which is really quite wonderful. And they tend to agree, even if they're coming from very different perspectives. You know, they agree we can be secure, orderly, and humane, right? We can walk and chew gum. So I'm happy to dive into Women of Welcome more, but taking a break there after that overview.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, we're kind of in it already. You know, the kind of politics of this current moment. I mean, you mentioned that you have people who are involved in Trump's first administration and the Bush era. I think a lot of folks have noticed Trump's second administration is different from his first administration.
Yes.
In his first administration, there was a refugee resettlement program.
That's right.
You know, and the second administration, I think they're letting in 7,500 refugees, and they're all kind of Afrikaners. People have been talking about that. You know, and the first administration, I think there was the Build the Wall, so that was a part of the platform. But you know, I think there was a sense in which there's an element there of creating that order and structure that you're talking about, and it doesn't have to be inhumane. And the second administration, the campaigning to the current moment, immigration has felt like the issue that got him elected. Maybe, you know, it was like immigration and affordability were the two things. And certainly this year has felt like one of the, you know, the issues that I see in the news all the time, whether it's, you know, ICE raids or refugee resettlement. And there's so much complexity in this issue. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this series, is to talk about some of the different issues underneath the issue of immigration and to focus on this issue of refugees, frankly, because I think it is the most morally unambiguous. I think there are fraught conversations to be had around how to navigate our legal immigration process, what to do with illegal immigrants, you know, those kinds of things. And my view, refugees are a pretty straightforward moral imperative. and we could talk about that. But I guess this is a little bit of a ramble here. But has this year been different than previous years, and how's the
Oh yeah.
national immigration for what has this year looked like for the National Immigration
Yeah.
Forum?
Yeah.
And is it a year that feels like, okay, maybe where we really need pushback is towards that humane,
Mm.
like let's keep the
Mhm.
order and the security. Maybe we need more of that than what we had under Biden, but now maybe the pendulum has swung,
Yeah.
and if there's a tension between these two things, now is maybe the time to talk about being more humane. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, wow, I mean, you said so many wonderful things, and I agree with all of them. What I would say, big picture, is that we have to have an immigration system, and we should have an immigration system, right? So, those are two big conversations right now. Those were not in the regular American kind of vernacular. Those conversations were not in the forefront 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? So that has
Yeah.
shifted dramatically. We are now in the conversation around do we need immigration? And should we have immigration, right? Those are two different things. And one thing I would say, since we are, believers here on this podcast specifically,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a
Mm-hmm.
kingdom that is bigger than this world and bigger than our allegiance to our own country and our own borders, is that the Bible has nothing to say about U.S. immigration. Period. The Bible has nothing to say about it. What should U.S. immigration look like? That you won't find it. However, what you will find over 100 times is a call to us as believers on how to treat the sojourner, the foreigner, the alien, depending on how you translate the term, the immigrant, right? The person who is
Right.
passing through that needs help, that is vulnerable. So we got a lot of information on that as believers. So to your point, refugee resettlement absolutely should be something that has a moral imperative that we should be including. We should be this beacon of hope. We have been the country of receiving the boat people. I don't know if you know some of the amazing Vietnamese Christians that live in this country now, thriving. Almost the whole Boeing company is made up of the boat people, children, right? Engineers now who are allowing our country to thrive and building future engineering of aviation out of our country.
Mm.
We've helped after the Armenian genocide. Many Armenian Christians fled right after the Armenian genocide. We've been the number one. Welcomer, the Kinder program, the children who fled Nazi Germany, right? On and on and on. We can go on and on. And that has always been our leadership in the world, in modern history. And I think most Americans, kind of regardless of your faith background, but if you follow a moral imperative, especially Christians, we should think about wanting to make sure our country models that behavior. The other thing is that as global citizens of this country, now kind of grounding us on this earth, and representatives, of God, in 2014, and I'm sure your past guests talked about this, but we had 24 million displaced people in this world. In 2024, we had 120 million displaced people. We went from 24 million to 120. So, as global citizens, to actually turn our back,
Why? What
um,
drove that?
so many issues, right? Lots and lots of political issues, war, a lot of unrest,
Yeah.
a lot of environmental issues. People's livelihood has displaced them sometimes within their own country, right? So they were in a
Mm-hmm.
farming community and they had to move over to a border in an urban area. Some of that displacement is intra-country as well, right? Um, and also economics. If we look at Venezuela, we can point very specifically to three huge economic hits that they took. And also with Venezuela, political issues, right? So there's also been lots of political issues. So when you add all of those together, you see that people are displaced in our world and that we should be a part of that solution. We are not the only solution. We cannot throw open our doors to everyone, but we are the richest country, and we have the most resources, and we should at least take our fair share and partner with the rest of the world in solving that problem, welcoming folks, right? And we are so far from that number. Even in last year's number at 125,000 was still pretty much a far cry from what we could actually absorb, resettle, and process in a responsible way. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot there. Brian, I would want to say one more thing, though, that even though refugee resettlement has that large moral imperative, one thing I think people really don't understand is that the refugee criteria is so slim. There's only 5 criteria. So the people that are displaced
I
around
was
this
going to
world,
ask. I was going to ask you
yeah,
about this. So this is great, and I did want to also
yeah,
just clarify. And people who listen to previous episodes will know this,
yeah,
but I just want to make sure everyone knows the 120 million number that you mentioned is both refugees and internally displaced peoples. So
yeah. It's
that's not
all
100
displacement,
all
all displacement.
displacement,
Yeah.
including within country. So if someone is uprooted from
hmm
their
Yeah,
home
inter-country
and
as well as
hmm
pushed out
yeah,
of country. Yeah.
just to make
Yeah.
that distinction. But
No,
yes,
that's
please go
good.
ahead
That's
because
very
you're
good.
about to answer my next question. So
Yeah.
keep going.
No, you can cut me off, please, if you want to. But I was just going to say that there's only 5 criteria. They are very slim, and hunger is not one
hmm
of them.
hmm
So if you
hmm
are literally not able to feed your children, I'm a mama, I heard you're a dad, right? If we are not able to feed your children, you don't qualify. If you're trying to flee just because you need to find a way to feed them, you
Yeah.
wouldn't qualify for the refugee program. So our moral imperative certainly does go beyond just refugee resettlement, as we think about the world's vulnerable and how we as Christians are called to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
Okay, so there's something I've been thinking about a lot that I want to try to disentangle. Maybe you can help me do that.
Yeah.
America First is a slogan, and
Mm.
there is this strong sense that, in our political moment from certain parts of the conservative movement, that America, we should put America first. That, why you kept using the word should as you were talking. Like, we
Mm.
should
Mhm.
open up our
Mhm.
space, not to every refugee in the world, but to some. These are people who are deeply vetted. The most vetted immigration process in the world, I think,
Mm.
is
It
refugee
is by
resettlement
far.
to the United States. And
Yeah.
they're not criminals. They're
Mhm.
often, they contribute to the economy. They're often educated, really hardworking. If people, our
Mm.
listeners, have interacted with those people, but there is a sense, I think, in our political moment of, yeah, but within the realm of politics, why should we be compassionate?
Yeah.
Can we or should we, quote, love like Jesus, which is what this podcast is about, within the realm of politics, within the realm of
Yeah.
policy? I think sometimes Christians have this kind of, they think about different spheres of life as if there are
Mhm.
rules within those spheres. And
Mhm.
church is one sphere, business is a sphere, politics is a
Mm.
sphere, and there's an internal set of rules. And I think one of the things I believe, and we had a conversation with someone from the AND campaign recently that
Mhm.
was around this issue, is that you can't not be yourself in any setting, right? Your
Yeah.
values are your values. And one thing I believe is that our faith as Christians actually should encompass all of those spheres.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so if our politics are not motivated by love, I don't think they're Christian politics.
Mhm.
If our business, our work within business is not motivated by love, I don't think we're being faithful in our business. Every element of our family, and if we're into athletics, when we play sports, there
Yeah.
should be the love of Jesus
Mm.
animating how we show up.
Mhm.
But I don't think everyone thinks that. And I think people kind of separate out these things, and
Yeah.
they'll say, oh, well, it's reasonable for within the rules of the game of politics, we should be
Mm.
America first. But when you go to church, we're going to talk about Jesus and loving our neighbor and stuff like in our personal lives,
Mhm.
Um,
That's a good. Yeah,
anyways, could
I'm
you
with
talk about
you.
that some? Yeah, just like like, is America First wrong? like, should and I don't want to get you in trouble, pushing back on
Okay,
these things, because I know
you're good. You're good. It's a good question. And I do have a Master's of Divinity degree as well. So
yeah,
even though
that's great.
I work in policy, I'm with you. So a couple of things I would say. I think we could have a whole episode where we just discuss compartmentalization of
Yeah,
Christians, and I think
yeah,
that's what you're talking about. And that's
yeah.
and that is. I'm going to say something that's a little shocking, but we need to hear it as the church. That's why Christian nationalism has a foothold.
Hmm.
And so we have to make sure that we do check ourselves constantly and say, I am Jenny. I am first, a child of God. And then here are the other things that I layer onto that. But first of all, I'm made in the image of God and likeness. And the prayer I pray every day is thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So everything I try to do, while it might have rules of engagement, I try to be my full self in those spaces, right? And know that at the end of the day, I wanna hear good and faithful servant, right? And so I think that's the hardest thing for us as Christians. But what I would say that I've been living into, that I would encourage folks to latch onto, is that we are being told, and this is not a particular party, not a particular politician in any way. So please, I hope folks won't hear this as partisan, but just in general, we're being told to be in fear of scarcity, both as the church, as Christians, but also to be in fear of scarcity in our country, right, as
Yeah.
Americans. And so, what I would say is neither of those things are true. We don't live in scarcity in our country. Our resources are plentiful. And everything you could throw at me. We have 8 to 10 million jobs every single month open that we cannot fill and haven't filled for 10 years. They're middle
Mm.
skill jobs. We don't have the people to do it, no matter how much immigration is flexed up or flexed down, no matter how much we've said college does or doesn't matter. We still don't fill those jobs, period. Our GDP is just giant, right? It's producing, it wants more, it wants more. So we don't live in scarcity. We know the solutions to immigration reform. We've had them for decades. We can solve it. We can walk and chew gum for sure. And then also theologically, which is what you're also definitely scratching at, we don't live in scarcity. No matter what table we set, there will be enough fish and loaves. I mean, come on, right? We have a lot of scripture to tell us about this. So I think, Brian, what we're being called to do right now as Christians living in this world is to your good point, to push back on compartmentalization,
Hmm.
to push back on fear of scarcity, and to say we serve a God that's bigger, and we can come to these big questions and ask our big God to come to them, right? And to try to work through them together.
That's such a good point, Jenny. Such a good point. I do think the abundant scarcity distinction is underlining this conversation as well. Talking about refugees, I said earlier that this feels like one of the more morally unambiguous
Mm-hmm.
segments of the immigration population, conversation, and you agreed with that. Um, for but I want to add some nuance here and explain and make flesh out the argument of why I see it that way. So could you just educate us for a minute on the differences between refugees, asylum seekers, legal immigrants, and illegal immigrants? I know this is like a lot
Sure.
to
No, happy
ask,
to
but
do it.
just
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, I'll do it fast. So it's actually quite clear, honestly, even though nothing is clear, even though our system is very ambiguous. So refugees are those that are there's the UN has a determination factor, right? The UNHCR is the agency of the UN. There's a list of determinations. There's 5 categories. So the UN has officially identified that group or individual is a capital R refugee. They've designated them to move into the refugee process. That usually means there's a long list of it, but usually it means there is absolutely no way that individual could return home safely for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the easiest way I can say it. They move into a lily pad country. Usually there's 13 countries that then hold all of the refugee camps, and then the receiving countries then put them into the queue and then receive them as they can. And to your point, most people live at least 10, 13, 14, 15 or more years in those camps. They become their home, right? And there's a whole lot of problems with that. But so that's a refugee, capital R. Asylum seeker, so when a refugee arrives then in a country, they arrive, at least in the US, there's different processes in other countries, but as soon as they arrive, they're handed their papers, they are automatically lawfully entrant as soon as they're playing touchdown, their feet hit the ground, whatever mode, and they then a year later can file if they don't have any issues with law or they don't violate any of their conditions. A year later, they can apply for their green card, which will take them 3 to 5 years then to get beyond that point. So that's a refugee, and that's the 7,500 people that we've been talking about. An asylum.
And that, real quick, the 7,500 is the limit that President Trump has set on the total number of refugees the U.S., the cap. And so presidents determine this on an annual basis, is my understanding.
Yes, they determine it in the fall, usually every year, and we never meet it. So that's why the 7,500 is even more concerning, because even with the 125,000 cap that Biden got to in his last year, which is the highest we've had historically, we still didn't come close to that. I think we came in around 96, 97,000. So even with a generous cap, USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office, often can't process fast enough because of the backlogs. And so we don't always resettle everyone in that cap. So then asylum seekers, asylees, or asylum itself, is it's created by INA, and so it's an international law. And these folks lawfully, this has been the biggest misnomer of the last 2 years, these folks are lawful applicants of the asylum system. That means that they can touch ground without permission to touch ground. So they can touch ground and then immediately report to a port of entry and report themselves to a CBP officer, Customs and Border Patrol officer. And they will say, I want to file for asylum, meaning I have a credible fear claim and I'm unable to return to my home country. That is when they take their biometrics, they do their fingerprints, their picture, they then lawfully enter them into the processing system and into the FBI name checks and all the extreme vetting portals, and they then start their official application, and they will then meet with an officer and prove their credible fear claim and then be adjudicated by a judge in court. So that's also a lawful way to enter the U.S. It is not unlawful to be an asylum seeker. So those are the two parts of our humanitarian system. So I'll take a pause there before legal and illegal.
Excellent. Yeah, so both of those systems are legal processes. Both of those systems are designed in response to the reality that there are human beings fleeing violent persecution, conflict, who are often well-educated, college degrees, sometimes lawyers and doctors, and are escaping from their country. And within the world of refugee resettlement, the people who end up in the United States, like we're vetting these people within refugee camps for years.
Oh my goodness.
And
Dream vetting.
And letting in kind of the cream of the crop is my understanding, and can be kind of choosy there. And so anyways, so yeah, I think this is why this issue is a matter in my mind of just compassion towards people. Often persecuted Christians end up in the United States fleeing religious persecution. And so this is a policy area where I think we can express the love of Jesus that feels really clear to me. And yet this year what we've seen is it has been lumped in to conversations around fentanyl, conversations around, violent crimes that illegal immigrants commit, all these other things, when it is not the same issue. And so that's why I wanted to kind of highlight. But yeah, I guess let's talk about those kind of more fraught issues, legal immigration, illegal immigration.
Absolutely. So then there are other categories, right? So there's a whole lot of lawful, our legal immigration process is what we refer to it. It's a lot of categories of folks that are allowed through different avenues to apply to immigrate to the U.S., right? Some have come first as students, and then there are various categories they would then move through to then enter into the workforce. Lots of steps along the way. There's 4 categories, actually, they would move through to then be able to be a permanent resident in the U.S. and working in our workforce. All of those visa pathways are what we would call our legal immigration process, or our legal immigration system, plus our humanitarian, which would be the 2 categories we just spoke about. So when you hear somebody talk about the legal immigration system, that's what they mean, are all of the lawful ways that people are allowed to enter the country. Those have all been, before we move on to the unlawful ones, those have all been shrunk immensely and or paused in this administration. So the 26 after yesterday, executive orders have either closed off or significantly reduced American companies' access to workers and the ability for people to lawfully enter the U.S. We can talk about that in a little bit, but I'm just going to move on to what then we would consider unlawful or illegal, depending on the terminology. Someone who enters the country not through a port of entry, so between ports of entry, without seeking out CBP, without making a credible fear claim, and then filters into the country to be able to work, is what we see most likely. Now there are humans everywhere. There are people who shouldn't be where they shouldn't be, and there's people who make their own. We have will, and that's people make their own choices. So I'm not going to say every single person is absolutely working and contributing to their maximum. But what people do need to know is they are not eligible for any public assistance, right? So anyone who enters unlawfully then is not able to use anything other
Food
than
stamps,
charitable.
Medicaid,
charitable giving. So what we don't have, and this is it's important to say this, we don't have a bunch of people just coming, getting food stamps, using free
taxes.
childcare, not paying taxes, and just living, quote, off the system, right? We don't have that. It's not possible. And also what we know from polling after decades and decades is that people are terrified of, they don't want to be pulled over. They don't want to go to the ER. They don't want to engage the government in any way because they're afraid, they then would be removed.
Deported.
And most people are working. 73% of our agriculture workers we know have not been able to attain lawful status, right? So they're contributing. Their employers are paying taxes on their behalf because they have to pay for each worker that they have. So the employers are contributing into the system from their wages and from their own contributions as well. So that's a really quick run through. We can break down any of those that you'd like to hear more about.
Yeah, that was excellent. I think what I want to talk about is what I see as the 2 main reasons that we're in this current mood as a country towards immigrants. Feel free to add other reasons or to challenge my assessment.
Sure.
I think there are 2 reasons. I think one is that there was dissatisfaction under the Biden administration on some of those other components. So you talked about being humane. We've been talking a lot about being humane. It's not the only thing that matters in immigration policy. Having structure and order, a secure border and order also matters. I think there was dissatisfaction in the Biden administration around the security and order within our immigration system. So it's kind of a backlash to that. So I think that's reason number 1, we're in this mood. And then the second reason is something I heard on a podcast actually this morning. Ross Douthat had on, I guess, Charlie Kirk's successor in Turning Point, and they were talking about this issue of immigration and how important it was. And the argument he made was more of like a sociocultural argument. He said it's okay to want to live in a place where you understand the people's culture around you. We live in a country where there's a great fragmentation and
Yeah, JD
social
Vance has been saying
connection.
the same thing recently.
Yes,
Yeah.
we need social connection, we need community, and so this argument that by limiting immigration, maybe we can kind of stem back the wave towards loneliness in this country by having communities feel more familiar, like who your neighbors are and what they're like. So I think I want to spend some time on both. Well, I guess
Yeah.
I want to spend some time on both of those and talk about
Hmm.
them from a Christian perspective. But before we get to that, any other reasons that you think we're in this kind of like no immigrants, no refugees, no asylum seekers? Definitely, let's get the illegals out as quickly as possible. But we're even going to cut back on legal immigration. I mean, we're in a current
Yeah.
moment where across all of the categories we just discussed, there is this huge pullback towards,
Yeah.
wanting America to be a place. So those are the two reasons I see. But any other reasons that you think we're kind of in this mood as a country?
Yeah, I mean, I do think fear is huge, right? So the ways that fear has been used, either
Yeah.
fear has been used to tell people that there will be you will be hurt some way. There will be immigrants that somehow commit violence against your family, right? That's one piece that has been blown astronomically out of proportion because the numbers are just so low. There have been a few horrible events which we never
Yeah.
condone,
Yeah.
but U.S. born violence is way, way, way higher per capita, right? So the fear of that, the scarcity fear as well of my child just graduated as an engineering student and he can't find a job, and being told that newcomers are the ones that are taking those jobs, which is untrue. As I told you, we have 8 to 10 million middle skilled jobs available at every single moment. In fact, my husband works in engineering. He said there's people begging in like Louisiana to pay $60 an hour for a machinist as soon as possible, right? And can't find anyone. So that scarcity, the fear that their children won't do better than you. And yeah, I mean, I think fear of the unknown, and that really bothers. I would say honestly, that bothers me the most as a Christian, to be honest, right? Because I
Right.
don't necessarily read scripture to believe that I'm going to have a thriving career and I'm going to do well economically. That doesn't feel like the goal of being a Christian. To me, as I read scripture, or a promise of being a Christian, and I think also, yes, there are security protocols we have to make sure are in place, which is why I told you we work with the people that we work with, but the fear that someone who's not like you might somehow change you in a way that is going to hurt you is really problematic for me as a Christian, because for a personal experience, I feel like I thrive the most as soon as God puts me in the middle of an atmosphere where I see something different, experience something different than my own background. I'm always stronger for it. I'm always richer. I'm always blessed by it. And in fact, as a middle-aged woman, the people I choose to be around, I've noticed, are the people who grew up very differently than me. And I feel like they enrich my life so much. And, as a Christian, I mean, the early church practice of having an extra bedroom in your home because you were just ready for Jesus to arrive in the guest at any moment and need hospitality. I mean, how far have we come from that, right? If we truly allow this mentality that we're hearing from political leaders to filter into our Christianity and to say to us, it's okay for me to only worship with Anglo descendant Christians, and to read scripture that way, and to make sure we all have the same language and socioeconomic background, same amount of degrees, and that our parents, grew up in the same state or whatever. I mean, how sad of a watered down to the gospel is that? And how much opportunity have we lost? Do we still entertain angels? Do we still entertain
Yeah.
Jesus? And so I would just say that that one bothers me honestly the most. The others, to your point of the compartmentalization, I do think that we're able to, as Christians, to work with law enforcement. We can figure this out, can work with national security. We can have a secure system that does keep us safe. We have one. And my national security experts would say if you just let it function, it will protect us. That's what it's been built to do. And then the second piece, around jobs, we know that there's just a lot of scarcity mentality there. We know there's lots of work for people that do want to work, lots of skilling opportunities for people that do want to have that opportunity. And then we know newcomers only generate more jobs and generate more GDP for us all,
I was
right?
going to say that. That's
Yeah.
That's a really good point. So I have a degree in economics from Duke, and when I hear people talk about being anti-immigration because of the economy, part of me just gets all tense
Yeah.
because it's such a
I'm a
fundamental
child of an economist too, so you and I can
misunderstanding.
cringe
Okay,
together.
yeah, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of
Yeah.
how the economy grows. Now, I do think there's a misunderstanding on the other side as well. Like, I think I've heard people say you have to have immigration in order to have economic growth. Like, you have to keep your population growing. I don't see economics that way. Like, I think if you add people, yes, but the per cap, because what we want is per capita growth, which is that the entire economy, controlled for the number of people is getting larger. The average
Right.
person is getting richer. And
Yeah.
the way that happens is through specialization, through technology,
That's right. That's right.
through innovation. And so those are the actual drivers of, real GDP growth, and real
Right.
GDP means, divided by the population. So it's
Yeah.
per capita. And so in that sense, what we should want is immigrants who are highly skilled, or who are able to specialize in certain tasks that maybe America, the other Americans aren't savvy on doing, even if that isn't agriculture or construction. But then on the innovation side, if they're innovating within American companies, that's actually going to drive real GDP growth.
right.
And so I just think that's the way I see it. I think almost like both sides of the argument misunderstand
Totally.
what economic
Right.
growth is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're so
Drives me
right.
a little
But
crazy.
also, as Brian, you're totally right. The huge, though, player in all of this, right, is the rapidly retiring, very large baby boomer population, right?
Yes.
So
Right.
you're right. It is per capita, but the amount of
We
workers
do
that
need
are
people.
leaving the system in
Yeah.
volume. So
Yeah.
2 years ago, 5 years ago, we first did this research project called Room to Grow. And at that point, we found, and then we renewed it again just after COVID, but we found that even with the 1 million, so usually the last 12 years or so, 12, 15, 18 years of our immigration system, we've brought in about 1 million immigrants a year across all of the categories that we just spoke about. Of course, not the undocumented, but 1 million for the legal immigration system, right? That's everyone from a student to an H-1B and humanitarian. So that was keeping us only at the point where we still needed a 30% growth of the workforce just to keep up with the rapidly retiring baby boomer population. So even with 1 million newcomers a year, we still needed 30% more workers, to your point, to get to the true GDP, right, number per capita where we have enough workers participating in the system. So it doesn't mean that we need this infinite number at all, but
Right.
it does mean that our country, our economy needs to be fed. It needs to be fed a certain amount, and it's very far from that. And I've actually really worried about the other categories of folks that are also choosing to not participate in the workforce anymore, and native born, and how that's going to continue to compound, right, the issue.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. Let's circle back a little bit towards the kind of sociocultural argument here, and I think the notion that communities are stronger and healthier if they're homogenous, or at least if they're kind of the makeup of them is constant. I mean, there are very few homogenous communities, even where I grew up. I actually grew up, Jenny, in a county that has this like really intense history of racism. Forsyth County, Georgia. It's I didn't know this growing up, actually, but Oprah came here in the 1980s and called it the most racist county in America, and it was very white. And now my home county is significantly more diverse. We've actually had a lot of immigration from South Asia, and so it's changed a lot. But there's this kind of argument that like a community is stronger. It's easy. I don't know. It's easier to make friends to have if you are similar to the people around you. I mean, I like you. I don't buy that argument, but I think it's getting at a hunger that's really very real. And so I do feel like we have to, I don't know, as a country, work on that hunger. And so what is the solution? This is a big question, Jenny. But I'm just processing. What is the solution to the desire for real community? And I think there's a sense in which, to put it bluntly, immigrants have been scapegoated for problems in the economy, for problems in our own social isolation, for problems with drug addiction and with crime. Every issue, it's like, well, we can find an immigrant to blame for that. And that is a powerful political technique. It's not new. A lot of other countries have done it. And there's tons of historical examples, but it won an election. And but we do need like actual solutions to these problems. And so much of it is about this social decay and this social isolation. And so, what do we do? How do we become, I guess, people who are really well connected? And if we're going to live in a world like where there is more immigration, like how do we build strong communities as our communities are changing in their makeup? Yeah,
it's a really good question. I absolutely agree with you that we're scapegoating. Immigrants only make up 14% of our population. They make up 19% of our workforce. We can talk about that, how much they're over participating in the workforce based on how much they are actually in the population. But they're only 14% of our population. So for us to say they are the reason, and we should want to make sure we don't have any neighbors who aren't like us, I'm going to say something harsh. But what I feel like this is actually saying is much more of a race comment than it is actually about not being able to communicate or have the same exact customs with immigrants who are coming newly to our country. It might mean that people are identifying people that don't have the same exact skin color as them as somehow different from them in their experience, because we are much more diverse. We're still not even as diverse as that comment makes it seem, but we're much more diverse racially. But that many of those folks have been here generations after generations after generations, right? They are Americans and they have all the same customs. They watch Home Alone at the holiday. Everyone has the same exact cultural customs that would allow you to then have a friendship with them. So I really worry about, like, this is a very worrisome cultural comment, because I think it very much means something very different. It's sort of a Trojan horse. It's sort of a comment inside of a comment. And I think we as Christians should absolutely push back. The other huge thing I would say, and as I promised, I wanted to get back to Women of Welcome,
Yes.
Yeah, so we
just got sidetracked on
we have this incredible group. Yeah, we have an incredible group of women, and it's fun for me to talk about because it is also my demographic. Evangelical women, mostly from all over the country, but mostly from the Southeast, the Mountain West, the Southwest, and the Midwest. And many of them, it's hundreds of thousands of them, and they have started to ask themselves questions about how they should treat the immigrant. How is Scripture calling them to treat the immigrant in their midst? And what does that mean? What does that look like? And how should that show up in their daily lives? The very interesting thing, though, is that many of these women first got interested in this because of adoption. So many of women or their besties, people that are close in their lives, have in the last decade adopted either an unaccompanied immigrant child, and or a child from another country. And for the first time ever, that might be the first time they've ever dealt with issues of race and or immigration. And it's allowing them to start asking questions about who they love and why they love them, and what does that mean then about what Scripture is telling them about immigration, how they should show up for newcomers. And what's so beautiful about these group of women is what they've turned to is proximity instead of politics. And so they're going down to the border and seeing things with their own eyes. They're going to immigration court in their own town and watching a children's docket. They are volunteering with resettlement organizations, and many of whom have never actually had an immigrant in their lives before. And so for them, this is a pretty big stretch. These are brand new issues. And they're really starting to understand like the richness there. And so I'm with you that I feel that I hear the pervasiveness of this cultural conversation and I worry about it, but I do still think that as soon as someone has tasted proximity, they're transformed, and you really can't bottle it up at that point because you have been made better, once you're in community with others.
And hey, that actually sounds the underlying issue that we were just talking about, which is that social isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, exactly.
What's giving you hope in this season, and what have you seen in terms of the impact of Women of Welcome and the evangelical community this year that gives you hope?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I actually have quite a bit of hope. Brian, just before we started, which people won't know, you offered a prayer for us before we got started, which I thought was so lovely. And thank you for doing that because I needed that. Our work is hard. This year has been hard as you're advocating for immigrants, as you can imagine. But one thing you said is, God, your mercies are new every morning. And that is so true. In fact, just yesterday, we had a diversity lottery eliminated through an executive order. And literally working in this space, the hits have been coming often daily. And yet I wake up each morning and realize that this is not my welcome. Not my welcome as an American, not my welcome as a Christian. It's God's welcome. And I am able to be a part of God, out there in the world, being with God, extending welcome to people, to God's love, to God's grace, and in all the ways that permeates our world. And so, I think that almost every day there is someone that I feel like is sent to me that gives me hope that is happening in other people, in just really amazing spaces, in meetings I never anticipated. I might have already villainized somebody in my mind, and I go to a meeting and I hear something pretty amazing out of their mouth, right? So I do think that so many people out there, while media is shouting at us that we are divided, we believe different things, what I find and what polling tells us is 80% of the country is very much aligned on wanting something that's in the middle, that's secure, orderly and humane, and that people are loving. They don't want to see families separated. They want to figure this out. They want to both love their own neighbors and also people displaced around the world. So I really, it might sound kind of crazy because it's been such a hard year for this work, but I do feel that almost every day I feel that jolt of hope and encounter someone that is out there digging a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And Jenny, what can followers of Jesus do? How can we be people of hospitality, love of the stranger? How can we love especially refugees? And this moment and that could be from a policy perspective or just a proximity perspective or philanthropy. I believe in philanthropy. This is called the Simple Charity Podcast. we believe in giving wealth to help.
We do too. I run a nonprofit,
vulnerable neighbors.
So we do too. But I mean, it's a hard year for immigrant serving organizations. For immigrants, of course, but the organizations that support them, most of them, and also refugee, and I include refugee resettlement in all, like that's one huge bucket, right? Because we've taken such a huge hit, many people have seen philanthropy kind of turn away from the issue for various reasons. Many are coming back, thank goodness. I've heard from a lot of folks saying, hey, we do realize that there's something we can do to help newcomers, refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants. And so I think philanthropy is sort of trying to come back. But the big federal dollars that went away also in many ways supported a lot of those types of orgs as well. So giving of your money, of course, supporting to these really amazing organizations. I would point you to the Evangelical Immigration Table is a great place to look up some of those organizations. The founders of that, you'll see great groups like World Relief and World Vision, Bethany Services, a bunch of really wonderful orgs there. They would be great to support other immigration serving groups as well, and advocacy groups. And then volunteer. Oh my goodness, volunteer. Just because it sounds like we're only going to receive 7,500, there's a lot of folks that are already in the country who still need support. They still need someone to practice their interview skills, to really help them prepare for their English exam. Whatever they're working on. And so really getting in relationship and getting in proximity. And then go to womenofwelcome.org and check out all those resources. There's a lot of Bible studies, discussion prompts, things you can be doing, cooking, kind of cooking small group recipes and things from other cultures that you can be doing together, and then having a Bible study and a discussion around an issue that touches that group of newcomers. So, keep pressing in. What I would say is don't allow the complexity to scare you away. One of the wonderful things Women of Welcome always says is they attach conviction to compassion. The women come knowing that they feel compassionate. There's a tug on their hearts, but they don't have they're not bolstered yet by that. So they really help them understand that, it's okay to have compassion. It isn't toxic. And it's okay to really, to feel confident in that compassion and still not have all the answers. You don't have to have the answers. It's a complex system and I don't have the answers. I've been doing it 23 years, but, you can feel that, there's something deeper here.
Yeah. Last question for you, Jenny. What are you learning in this season of life about what it means to love like Jesus?
Oh, I'm learning that I still don't fully know it. I'm learning that
Me too.
I can be stretched more. Yeah, I'm learning that I can be stretched more. And I'm learning that I think what I'm learning the most this year is that I can actually comfortably just sit with people with whom I have a different opinion and still find a way to really respect their likeness of God, and actually not be fake for me, to actually just sit with them and really say, I identify you. We have the same likeness. So I think that's what I'm embracing this year, is the comfort of being able to do that.
The invitation to grow this week is to give some amount of money, any amount, to an organization that serves refugees. This could be one of the organizations we featured, National Immigration Forum, Inspiritus, and Every Shelter, or it could be a local organization in your community. Make a financial gift as an act of hospitality and kindness. Thank you so much to Jenny Murray for sharing your expertise with us. You can learn more about the National Immigration Forum, also known as just the Forum, at forumtogether.org. If you have feedback on this episode, you can reach me at brian@simplecharity.org. Next time, a conversation on U.S. foreign aid and how monitoring and evaluation professionals measure the impact of social programs. I hope you join me as we continue to learn to love generously like Jesus. Have a great week. See you next time.